Okay, so this is um, I think more like my experiences and some of the things that I've learned from school, but also from just general lifelong learning. And it is uh, different things that have been incredibly helpful for me in terms of learning or assimilating information and utilizing information that I've been exposed to. And so, one of the first things that comes to mind is when when I was in school during like elementary and um, I guess middle school, um, the schooling that goes on before high school. Um, During those, I wasn't really an A student, and I guess that's a bit of a misnomer in a sense, um, because I guess you don't go from being an A student to not being an A student, but the things in which I guess I didn't have straight A's is where I'm going. I'll talk more on that later. Um, and so I would pretty much always do my homework. I'd say, um, uh, early on in school, my mom would help me with my homework, but then eventually I just kind of like realized that that was too much trouble. That oftentimes my mom would get frustrated or things would just take longer, um, as opposed to me just going in and doing the homework by myself. Um, so I would always do the homework, but then in tests and that kind of stuff, I didn't really do that well. And so oftentimes I resulted to like cheating and that kind of stuff. And when I got to high school, there were a few things that changed. The first thing was that even though I was kind of like in this position where I wasn't doing super well, I was doing all right enough that when I got to 10th grade, I was put in the new group that was made for our class, in which our class was basically split. Shit, I need to take a step back. So, all the way up to 10th grade, my school was split into two simultaneous classes for each level. So this is in Puerto Rico where schools are pretty small. So generally in schools you only have like one class for one grade. So ninth grade would only have one class, but in my school they had two. And so the difference was that you had kind of like the main um, ninth graders, and then you had a special group of ninth graders that were kids that were diagnosed with like ADD or some kind of like learning disorder, or however you want to put it. Um, and so these kids were, even though they were getting the same supposed like content throughout the year, they were getting at it at a different speed, if that makes sense. So that they could assimilate it and then get through. And so if that somehow makes sense to you, that you would have two groups that in the same time are going through the same content at different speeds, then congratulations. But to me, even to this day, it doesn't make sense. And in 10th grade, however, or just when I got to 10th grade, they made a slight change in which our class was the first one to have three divisions instead. So you would have the normal course, the course for special students, and then an advanced group. And I was put into the advanced group. And something that immediately happened when I was in this group was that I was only working with 10 other students. There were like 11 or maybe 12 of us in the class. And by having such a small, close group, I think it really changed the dynamic that we had with ourselves, with each other, and with our teachers. So we, all of us, started doing way better in school, because it was like we were ourselves. Like in this group, we were ourselves, while in the other group, in the main group, we had all these friends. It's like a way bigger group, and we had all these friends who somehow influenced the way in which we behave and the way in which we acted and the things that we were doing and the things that we were paying attention to. Now in this closely knit group, we suddenly had space to sort of like be ourselves and be us. And I think this was a profound change that helped all of us almost like naturally do better, to like almost like naturally succeed. So that's, I feel like, kind of like the first thing that I want to bring up, that is that it seems to me that a lot of learning, or a lot of the environment of learning, has to do with us being in almost like an inner environment, or also like maybe like a physical environment in which we are flowing with the learning, as opposed to us trying to like force the learning into us, or us kind of like fighting or being in this kind of like conflicting situation with learning. Learning is something that's kind of like happening with us as we're kind of like maybe like growing ourselves. And the next thing would be sleep. And I think this became particularly noticeable for me during college. So I studied industrial engineering, which is also sort of like logistics type of engineering. Um, and by the time I got to like my maybe like second or third year, I knew very well that I was very nocturnal. That something would happen late at night and my brain would just like turn on and go completely crazy. So I knew that I wanted to do my classes as late as possible, preferably one right after the other, so I wouldn't have time to fuck around. So that I would get to the university, take one class, and go to the other class, and then go to the other class, and then get the heck out of there. And so during the night after that, I would get whatever work I needed done. Not to say I didn't procrastinate. And then I would sleep. I would go to sleep early in the morning, and wake up in the afternoon, and then kind of like repeat the process. And this is something, and I would also try to get a good amount of sleep. People say 7 to 8 hours of sleep. Other people say 9. I think different people need different amounts of sleep. I think the amount of sleep is also goes in line with the quality of the sleep you're getting. So try different things. Try like sleeping in different positions. If you have trouble with noise or with light, try sleeping with like a mask, or those kind of like noise canceling, or earbuds or something. There's a lot of things that you can kind of like play around with. One that I kind of like found out recently is also like, if there's these kind of like weighted bed sheets, or like heavy bed sheets, that help with like anxiety and certain things. And I feel like I have not had one of those specifically, but I can definitely relate to the feeling of being kind of like enveloped in kind of like that weight, or that almost like security during sleep, where it allows you to almost like just go in further and relax even further, and rest. And along this line, when it came to studying per se, so say that I would have a test tomorrow, I would study. I wouldn't really study. So how do I explain this? Basically, like, one of the things I learned, and I think it comes down to what I mentioned earlier about having an environment that works for you, is I realized that for whatever reason, books don't speak to me maybe as clearly as they seem to speak to other people. So if I had to go and study by looking at the book or by going through the book, I am probably not going to do as well in the class. However, where I do get the learning from is by focusing on the the teachers, focusing on what they're saying, the way they're saying it, the way they're explaining it. That it's almost as if my mind is like downloading their brain as they are speaking. That I'm getting information that is what they're saying, but it's also going beyond what they're saying. It's going into what they're implying and all these things. So the way in which I studied was I would make sure that I would be on time for every class and not miss any class. And then when it came to like actual like preparation for a test, if it wasn't a test of exercises, so a test like a math test in which you need to know how to make mechanical um, decisions and how to navigate a problem, if it was more like a test of sort of like logic or understanding of a topic, then generally what I would do is I would sit down with some of my other friends from the class um, that were studying, and oftentimes they would be the ones who would invite me. Because by having me there, they could ask me questions, and as they would ask me questions, it would help me kind of like understand it better, because I would have to kind of like dig into my mind and kind of like process things through and then share it with them. And it helped me realize that we absorb a very ridiculous amount of information, but we are not aware of it. That kind of like having that trust that you're doing kind of like the right thing and absorbing the information is extremely helpful in almost like getting out of your own way for your brain to do a lot of the heavy lifting. So being surrounded kind of like by those people really helped me kind of like sort of work through the ideas and thoughts throughout my mind. And it also helped me look at things a little bit differently, because there would be things that I would hear a certain way or think about it a certain way, and then sitting down with other people that would kind of like challenge that or evolve that. um, but then for things like math, where it's more mechanical, I would prefer to go for teachers, um, when I had the option, to teachers that would give a lot of kind of like practice exercises. So I would sit in class and pay as much attention as I could, and then I would go and work through the exercises. And if I had trouble, I'd then like ask questions and really try to understand not only the answer of the question, but also like why is the teacher answering even in the way that they're answering, kind of like trying to dig, almost like ciphering the answer and the words used for the answer and all these things, because then that gives you insight on the person and how the person works through the problems, which um, in a sense also gives you insight in how the person will go into attempting to check your understanding of that knowledge. Um, so the last thing I think, and this is more like a thing of after college, that I realized is just understanding that everything you learn is extremely useful for everything in your life. Um, and sure, there are things that might be like hard to set that line for, or like there are things that you might learn in a certain environment that might be hard to apply on another. But just going at it from the perspective of just learning or accepting kind of like learning, has helped me use knowledge from things that I didn't think would be related, and ended up being. So an example of that is that for some time I practiced archery. And one of the things in archery is that you stand in a particular way. So let's say that you're doing bare bow, recurve bow, and you stand in a particular way. You put the arrow in a particular way. You draw the string or the arrow in a particular way, and you anchor it in however form you want to anchor that in a particular way. And the reason you do all these things in a particular way is that if you always do all those things the same way, you are eliminating a bunch of variables or things that can change in every shot that you do. So then it makes it easier to be more consistent. And so if you think about it from that perspective, then that's something that you can use on everything. That sure, it would translate to maybe more direct sports that would be related to it, like maybe like pistol shooting or that kind of stuff. But also when I studied martial arts, it helped understand certain movements, that if you do certain movements a certain way, or if certain movements feel a certain way, or if you're trying to learn movements that are difficult, you isolate which variables are the ones that you can always reproduce, or which ways you can always do the same. And then the rest of the things is the part that you need to learn. And it makes learning certain things all the more approachable, because suddenly some of those things don't seem so insurmountable, because you know that they're pieces of that you can kind of like already put together. One more thing that I just remembered, and this was from college. During my going through my degree in industrial engineering, there's one of the main classes for industrial engineering is what's called lean, and it's sometimes combined with another topic which is Six Sigma. And I'm not going to get into what those things are, but essentially, like, one of the biggest lessons that I ever got from college was the professor that did the combinations of those two classes for me. One day he said, "Hey, you cannot be a lean engineer. You cannot put on the lean engineering hat and then do this type of work. This is something that you need to apply to your life, because the way in which lean in particular works is it's more like a kind of like a mindset type of change. So in implementing that kind of mindset in your life, you can then go into the workplace and truly put it to work." And so I think the reason this idea was so profound was that it made me realize that there are things in the world that we learn, again, that might seem like they're not related to each other. But if you learn how to incorporate them into your everyday life, if you learn something that truly resonates with you and that you can incorporate into your daily life, then you can go all the much more further with that idea or with that concept than if you were to just kind of like keep it to sort of like a textbook type of definition.